Speaking of the United States Senate, you know that I was going to make this segue. Let's take a very quick break. When we come back in 3 minutes, we're going to be joined by businessman Eric Hovde, U.S. Senate candidate Eric Hovde. Yesterday we had Senator Tom Coburn on, who was stumping around for Mark Newman yesterday. And today we're going to be talking with Eric Hovde, who is unveiling his economic plan later today. Stay tuned. It's 8:45. Yeah, the primary is about 2 months from now. August 14th, voters are going to have to go back to the polls and select who will be the Republican candidate to run for the Senate seat being vacated by Herb Kohl. The geniuses who run the Democratic Party have already designated, blessed, whatever you want to say, laid hands upon Tammy Baldwin, very liberal Democrat from Dane County, to be their nominee. One of those candidates is conservative businessman Eric Hovde, who joins me now live on the line. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Charlie. It's great being on your show today.
Well, let's talk about, you're going to be unveiling some economic ideas, which should be interesting since apparently the president's declared the private sector is doing just fine.
Yeah, an economy that's growing at less than 2%, half the rate of what we typically see coming out of a recession, an unemployment rate of 8.2%, but really if you look at the full unemployment picture, the U6 numbers, it's 14.8%. Only the president could think that's a good economy.
So what are you proposing today?
Well, I'm laying out my 8-point plan. And, you know, a lot of it you'd say isn't rocket science. It's basic common sense. Number one, we have to get our deficit under control. As you know, Charlie, that's the reason I'm in this race. We're seeing Spain implode, where it has a 24% unemployment rate, a youth unemployment rate of 25 years and younger of 54%. We're going right down the same path as Greece and Spain, so we've got to get that under control. And I ask everybody out there, all your listeners, think of it this way. If you're a business person, you're going to invest $5 or $10 million in a factory, and you're not going to get a return on that money for 5-10 years. Are you going to make that investment if you think the federal government's going to melt down? Of course not. So that's number one. Number two, how about some sensible tax reform? We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world, higher than Sweden, France, Italy, any place in Europe, higher than communist China. It's insane. Why are people going to build factories or businesses here when they can go over the Canadian border where their prime minister is trying to drive their corporate tax rate below 20%? Plus, our corporate tax rate is littered with corporate welfare loopholes for the giant guys that have bought off career politicians. Another just sensible thing, lower the corporate tax rate, get rid of the corporate welfare, fair up the system. How about number three? Deregulation. The first thing President Ronald Reagan did when he took over was deregulate the economy. It's estimated now, Charlie, that we spend, or it's costing the private sector over $1.5 trillion a year. That's insane. We have 81,000 pages of regulations. I mean, I don't even know how businesses can operate. I can tell you with my community banks, we're choking on regulations. Gallup polled small businesses. 46% of small businesses said excessive regulation is stopping them from hiring.
Yeah, I mean, as bad as the tax rate is, and obviously that's a disincentive for investment and growth. I get the same feedback from businessmen saying, you know, it's not just the regulation; it is the avalanche of regulations that we've been getting over the last few years.
President Obama, in just his 3 years alone, have passed regulations that cost the business community $46 billion, and he's out there actually trying to say that he's taking away regulations. I mean, I don't know if this guy is a little delusional or what, and I don't mean to be so harsh, but he's so hypocritical, and so much of the press has let him get away with it, and it's time for Republicans to stand up and call it out for what it is. He has been a disaster for the business community through excessive regulation, racking up massive amounts of debt. He has done nothing to change our tax system. He talks about it. He's done not one thing to do with it.
Okay, now if I'm counting correctly, we're 1 through 3. You know, dealing with the federal budget, reforming the tax code, and reducing regulations. Do you have a number 4 and number 5?
Yep. Number 4, audit the Fed, stop the Fed's dual mandate, stop the Fed's quantitative easing, which you know, Charlie, I've talked a lot about. Quantitative easing is money printing. Last year, the Federal Reserve bought 61% of all treasuries issued. That's devaluing our dollar, driving the price of gas up, food prices, all our basic necessities. Number 5, reform the financial service industry. Not with Dodd-Frank, with private sector approaches. Dodd-Frank embedded the too big to fail. It says these companies are too big to fail, thus they're going to get another taxpayer bailout. And what it does is puts them in an economic advantage over small financial companies. I think we need a fundamental overhaul of both the Fed as well as our financial service industry.
Okay.
Think of the internet bubble, the housing bubble, and now the government spending bubble. And those number 4 and number 5 were right at the heart of both of those.
And, of course, bubbles all end the same way. Speaking of the free enterprise system, can we make some money here and come back in 3 minutes?
Sure,
okay.
By all means.
We're talking with conservative businessman Eric Hovde, who is laying out his economic plan today. We've gone through, I think, 1 through 5. We're going to be back with Eric Hovde in just 3 minutes. It's 8:54. You're listening to News Radio 620. We're at WTMJ. We're going to talk about the president's comments about why he couldn't go to Wisconsin to campaign against Scott Walker. We'll also talk about the boycott of Bratfest that'll be coming up in the next hour. Right now, we're talking with conservative businessman Eric Hovde, Republican candidate for U.S. Senate. Thanks for hanging on so we could make some money in the free market, Eric. We'd gone through. You have an 8. I understand it is 8 points. The 8-point economic plan. I think we'd gone through 1 through 5.
Yep.
Okay, so we're at 6 now?
6. Repeal and replace Obamacare. You know, Ron Johnson has talked a lot about this. I'll give this perspective on it. The highest rate of inflation of any sector in our economy over the last 30 years has been health care. Higher education's number 2. What is the common trait between the two of them? Massive federal government involvement. Now 60% of health care spending comes through the federal government. That is what's driving up costs. So why would we go to centralizing health care and having it run out of Washington that doesn't know how to run anything? I think we have to fundamentally move away from it. We have to move to a free market solution. I believe in what Paul Ryan's been talking about, premium support for those people that don't have the economic means to afford their own health care, to allow them to pick and choose. So number 6 is repeal and replace Obamacare. Number 7 is something that career politicians have been talking about forever and never been able to get it done: energy independence. Last year, our trade deficit was $58 billion. Oil was 59% of that. So last year, we transferred out of American pockets $392 billion in our trade deficit and current account deficits. That is just giving money to the Middle East, and a lot of them are adversaries. It is transferring our wealth. We in this country have 1.5 trillion barrels of shale oil, a little harder to get at, but we have $270 trillion of cubic feet of natural gas. We could run our entire economy over the next 100 years on natural gas. It's time to open up drilling in not only private lands, public lands. Look at North Dakota, the lowest rate of unemployment in our country at 3%. The economy is booming. They can't even find jobs because they're utilizing the natural gas resources. So it's time to stop talking about it like politicians have for 40 years, and it's time to get on with actually making ourselves energy independent. And you know what? We could actually be energy exporter. We could actually be making money instead of doing this massive wealth transfer. That's number 7. Last point is we have to end cronyism. Cronyism is a byproduct of giant government, with the federal government now at 24% of our economy. what we get with that is special interests, be it public unions, big giant corporations that are accessing the public's money. It's either through our tax system or through rulemakings or earmarks or loan guarantees. Think of Solyndra. George Kaiser signed off or gave a major campaign contribution to President Obama. Once he got into office, President Obama signed off on a $500 million loan guarantee program for Solyndra, and the company goes bankrupt. Us taxpayers lose $500 million. President Obama still has his campaign contribution from Kaiser. You know, Wall Street was another example of it. We have to get rid of cronyism. It's distorting our free market system.
Yeah,
it's distorting our economy.
I think this is a way of turning around some of this class warfare to point out that the president who has been, has launched the class warfare, in fact, has his own form of crony capitalism, his own form of paying off the wealthy. The only difference, of course, is that he rewards the wealthy for political influence and for screwing up and being dysfunctional, as opposed to rewarding the private sector for being successful and innovative. Eric Hovde, thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it very much this morning.
Hey, great being on your show, and what a wonderful, a week ago we had victory, so it was a fantastic week last week, and great being on your show, Charlie.
All right, Eric Hovde, one of the four candidates for United States Senate on the Republican ticket.